Close your eyes and breathe in once, slowly and gently through your nose. Hold for a heartbeat and breathe out, soft and long. Imagine yourself slipping into a quiet afternoon where the world moves in a kinder rhythm. You are safe here. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, and feel how comfortable it is simply to listen. Tonight's story is a gentle evening walk through a life that opens like a garden. I'll bring you softly into Valancy's world. A small, shy woman who learns, in time, that freedom and wonder can bloom in the most unexpected places. We'll keep our pace unhurried, with warm detail and calm images to carry you toward rest. Valancy Stirling's life began in a tidy town where clocks and customs set the hours for everyone. She was small and plain, respectful to a fault, and careful in her ways. The house on Elm Street, where she lived with her mother and cousin, felt narrow and certain. Fixed meal times, well-worn rules, and the slow, familiar ticking of ordinary days. Most evenings, before she slept, Valancy allowed herself to visit another place altogether. A bright private world she kept in her imagination. It was a mountain castle, always blue at sunset, with banners and marble steps and fountains that sang at night. It was a gentle escape she could return to each night when the house felt too small. On a rainy morning that arrived like a deliberate hush, Valancy woke in the gray hour before dawn. Rain made the windows soft and the world quiet. It gave her permission to be a little lonely without witnesses. Her thoughts drifted through familiar sadness, the ache that had visited her more and more lately, the sense that life had passed on to other people while she had watched. Still, rain softened things, muffled gossip, canceled an annual picnic of relatives she felt obliged to attend, and opened the possibility of small, secret choices. She read to herself in the dimness, remembering the blue castle and the graceful, impossible things that lived inside it. The rain pressed at the window, tapping like a gentle drummer, urging her to something new. Valancy's room was modest and rather old. Its wallpaper had faded, and a cracked mirror leaned on the dressing table. Her belongings were neat but ordinary. If this were a story of sudden, sweeping riches, things might have changed outwardly. But Valancy's change, when it came from the quiet courage of one small decision: to pay attention to what she herself wanted once in a while. The world she carried inside, the castle of moonlight and marble and brave, devoted lovers, had kept her company for years, and the small freedoms of fantasy had sheltered her from a life she never quite owned. On that rainy morning, she made plans different from the usual such, as reclaiming a little time from relatives' expectations. A new book from the library carried an even gentler kind of promise. It was one of John Foster's nature books, which came to her like a cool, clear well on a thirsty day. Foster wrote of woods and wild things as if they were old friends. He said, "Fear is the original sin." That sentence, calm and harsh at once, settled in Valancy like a seed. so much of wrong in the world grew from being afraid? As that thought warmed, Valancy's next breath felt lighter. The rain kept them all home and freed her, for a little while, to choose an action that belonged to her. She walked into the library in a soft rain, grateful for the shelter between rows of books. Something in the quiet of the library steadied her. She chose a direction unhurriedly and let her fingers find another foster book, a gentle one about birds and trees and the way places keep secrets. She read, and the words invited her to look for other kinds of friends than the ones she'd always known. That afternoon, with a little tremor of daring, she went to the doctor about the ache in her chest, a small, private rebellion, a decision she felt she had to keep from the household fuss that would inevitably follow. She told herself she'd only ask a question, keep a secret, and be back home. The doctor was sudden and brisk, as old doctors sometimes are. But as he was called away in an emergency, Valancy found herself alone for a while and had time to think big, new thoughts. What it might be like not to live to other people's timetables. A week later, a letter reached Valancy that would stop and tilt her world. It was a blunt, honest note from that same doctor, and it declared, in the scientific manner of such things, that her heart was not quite safe and that her days might be shorter than she'd thought. The sentence felt like a small, heavy stone dropping into the quiet of her life. She sat with it and listened. It was painful, yes, but in the hush that followed came another kind of clarity. If the path ahead might be short, why not make what time remained hers? Why not let herself be what she had never been allowed to be? To love, to care, to move through the world without apologizing for wanting her own life. This thought freed something important. Fear had made her small. Now she could feel the first, small wind of revolt, not wild or cruel, but steady and clear. She would not subject herself to weeks of family fuss or to the heavy-handed pity that arrives when someone learns there is illness. She wanted her decisions, simple, human ones, to be her own. Alone, under a sky washed clean by rain, she took a step she never would have in her old timidity. The choice was to be gentle and kind to someone with less, and to walk toward a life that felt truthful. That life led her in a surprising direction. On the edge of town lived a man named Abel Gay, a large-hearted soul with a loud laugh and a clothesline of stories. He was known as Roaring Abel, and his little house by the road was a warm place of many smells and noises. There was inside it a woman named Cecilia Gay Sissy, who had been worn thin by illness and sorrow. She was shy, fragile, and alone in a way that made Valancy's careful heart ache. Valancy went there one evening with a quiet decision. She would keep house a little while and be useful. For the first time in a long while, she did something that belonged to her simply because she wanted to. She made meals, kept the rooms tidy, and read aloud from the few books she had brought, treatises on birds and the language of the woods, the best of companions for two who loved silence and long twilights, Abel and Valancy worked together in a natural rhythm, and the cottage grew softer with her presence. The tired house stitched itself back together, as if it had been waiting for such domestic kindness. Sissy's pallor was touched by sunlight again, and her smile, even if thin, returned. Winter had been a small season of gentle warmth. As days unfolded like paper petals, Valancy's life took on a new shape, one of small, real work, mending, stirring, sweeping, making a bed, tucking in a blanket. Those are the tasks that become prayers when they are done patiently. And Valancy delighted in the simple competency of home. Her blue castle still gleamed softly in her thoughts at night, but by day she crafted another kind of beauty in this modest kitchen. Down the lane, there came a man who moved among the pines like a reed in wind. He was known to the town in many names and whispers: Barney Snaith, a man with a gaunt, unexpected smile and a way with the woods. He was a quiet sort of presence who owned a little island on Mistawis, and his laughter came like a bell. People told strange stories about him, some mean and some fanciful, but none of that mattered to Valancy when she first saw him. He was kind. He brought fruit and newspapers, small courtesies that saved weeks of loneliness. He came more often, each time leaning a little more on the familiarity of that friendship. He and Abel traded stories, laughed at the wind, and sat with their hands in the pockets of their jackets. In the evenings, after supper, when Sissy slept, the three of them, Valancy, Abel, and Barney, would sit on the cottage steps and watch the sky go down, quiet and shared. Barney's presence was simple and steady. Valancy was not sure, in the beginning, what she would call it, but she learned to lift her eyes to him with trust. As the days softened into summer, Valancy's work kept her busy. She stitched, she cooked, she dragged the world gently back into order for the sick and for the tired. In the quiet that was so rarely hers, she read Foster's books aloud. Foster wrote of woods as companions, trees who held secrets, and birds who taught a listener to be patient. Those voices, both human and literary, coaxed her farther from the small rhythms of the Elm Street house and into a new life that tasted of wood smoke and orchard blossoms. In those days, her heart, the one that had been declared fragile, missed no beat. The strange, brave thing of it is that sometimes when the doctors name a danger, we brace and shrink. And sometimes the mere act of living a truth eases the cord in our chest. Sometimes, after a long day's labor, Valancy and Barney took a canoe out across Mistawis. The lake held a smoky blue that made any glass look dull and taught all other waters how to be luminous. Paddling with another person sets a gentle rhythm, forward, outstretched dip, and return. It is quiet, companionable work. In the reflected evening, when the sky folded into lavender, the island looked like a small, private kingdom, and everything seemed possible. Barney taught Valancy things in those easy hours. How to read the direction of wind by the way it touched the trees. How to feel the pulse of water against a boat's hull. And how to choose a place to sit in sun where the air is sweeter. He was patient and sometimes funny, with a softness when he spoke of ordinary things. They made small jokes and gave each other the sort of trust that grows from patience and required effort. One night, late and star-pale, with a lightness and trust that is only born of long shared afternoons, Valancy did a thing that surprised even herself. She asked him quietly, simply, if he would marry her. It was less a demand and more a kind of imploring hope, a way to anchor the time she had found, to make it belong in a different, promising way. Love can be a large and gentle force, and sometimes it comes without the thunder of declarations. Just a steady hand at your side that becomes a harbor. Barney smiled in a way that caught the lamplight. He said yes. There is a softness in the tone of some yes that feels like the word of a person who has chosen to be brave. They were married in a small, honest way, with someone's simple officiating and no parade of house lights. People in town whispered about the match. Old neighbors and relatives tusked and puzzled. But those days of gossip belonged to rooms Valancy had left. She and Barney had their first small, warm nights on the island, and the Blue Castle, which in truth had been only a little wooden cottage, welcomed their quiet laughter. They stocked the shelves with books and things found on the beach. They put cushions where no cushions had been. They found pleasure in the small machinery of living together. Choosing a pot for soup, learning the rhythm of one another's silence, and feeding the thin cats who circled like small moons around their legs. Seasons turned in a liquid, easy way. Valancy learned to cook with more confidence, and Barney found himself admiring little practical triumphs. The way bread browned at the edges in Valancy's careful hands, the way she would fold a napkin. They spent nights by the hearth, listening to the pine's quiet music through the chimney's breath. Winter arrived crisp and clear and strange in the north, but it was different now. There was always a lane to the mainland and a stove that sang a steady song. The island was a safe sort of kingdom, and they learned that the world could hold both the challenge of storms and the hush of perfect evenings by the fire. Together, they listened to crows and foxes, to the far rattle of rail, and to the whisper of the lake as it slept under ice. Valancy rested in the contentment of doing good work and being loved in a steady way. The old diagnosis that had once frightened her was a distant worry now. She learned that sometimes, when fear takes away your softness, living kindness can quietly return it. She also discovered that the person we grow close to can be complex, with a past stitched from many materials. People may carry strange stories. They may be misjudged by others. The man she'd married had once been called many names in rumor, but his gentle acts were not rumor. They were bread and heat and comfort, the ordinary sacrament of two lives. There were other small seasons of surprise. Once a man of quiet fame, a painter named Alan Tierney, who noticed beauty as if it were a personal secret, came to the island. He had a rare eye and a patient way of speaking. complimented Valancy shyly on the honest, strong shape of her face. At another time, Barney's father, a man with a booming laugh and a successful trade in bottles and remedies, turned up with a surprising warmth. He had been worried for his son and ended up admiring the woman who scrubbed pans and read well by the hearth. Life, it turned out, kept giving them small, steady gifts once it had opened. Valancy's blue castle had no gilded chamber, but it had windows that looked over a lake and a pair of hands who held hers through the long winters and the flying leaves. Like all true stories of gentle courage, Valancy's had its tests. One sharpness came on a summer evening when she and Barney walked near the tracks with a little boat parcel. Fate can move with suddenness, and a moment of mischance threatened a terrible accident. Valancy's shoe caught in a crevice of a rail, and a train's thunder drew near. In 30 seconds, a time that can feel like a lifetime, she feared the worst. Barney's response, equal parts instinct and love, was to move without thought. He tore at the shoe, cut at the lace, and hauled her from the path only seconds before the train screamed past. They stood in the hush afterward, shaken, breathing in the relief like oxygen. What that moment revealed deeper than any fear was the steadiness of their care. He would not leave her behind. Life, in its most dire instant, made his love and courage luminous. The event burned a new line of safety and gratitude into their days. It was a fierce, honest unmarriage of early anxieties that now settled into an intimate certainty. There were times of deeper astonishment, too. Once Valancy discovered, by accident, an ordinary desk in Barney's lean-to, and on it a proof of a book with her favorite author's name. Barney was the quiet man who could be John Foster, the writer whose voice had brought her so much comfort. It was a small private astonishment. The man who rode by the lake, who smoked his pipe and laughed at her jokes, wrote books of the woods that people read far and wide. It did not change their daily life in any grand way. If anything, it made the island a little more wondrous, folding the wide world gently into their ordinary scene. Sometimes the world beyond the island, the town and its predictable love of gossip, would put pressure at the edges of Valancy's days. There were moments when family and old neighbors could not believe that a careful, plain girl could be happy. Yet, the most stubborn gossip could not unwrite what had been real. Meals cooked with tenderness, nights of conversation and laughter, and quiet mornings on the water watching sunlight find silver on the lake. Through the seasons, Valancy's life steadied into an unpretentious joy. She and Barney made simple plans, walks in far countries when they could, and summers on Mistawis always when they were able. They kept a modest, honest house with books in the corner and a clock that ticked in a warm voice. Their cats curled, the wood stove sighed, and they listened to rain as if it were a kind guest. Barney's father was sometimes part of their life and sometimes set off on his own. But there was a new tenderness in those relationships, a fragile, patient forgiveness that had grown between men who had once been apart by many years and many misunderstandings. And Valancy, who in an earlier time had been asked to hide her feelings and live by other people's rules, learned courage of a different kind. She learned that her life could be simple and true in a way that mattered. She discovered that small acts of steady kindness build sanctuary, sweeping a floor, folding linen, reading a page out loud to a tired friend. She learned that to be loved is gentle work, and to love is a craft practiced day by day. She found that when fear loosens its grip, the soul can lean into the soft light that waits on the other side. On long evenings now, when the lake lay bright and the wild blossoms drifted their faint perfumes across the air, Valancy would rest her head on Barney's shoulder and listen to him tell a little story of roads and drifting places. Their lives were not endless triumphs, not dramatic victories. They were the small, intimate victories of two people who had chosen kindness and stayed. It is the quieter kind of happiness, not always visible on newspapers or headlines, but heaped inside a life like spare bread in a larder. She would sometimes sit beneath their affectionate, well-loved roof and think of the blue castle of her childhood imaginings. It still lived in her, gentler now, and real in a different way. If you picture that island at dusk, the lake breathing silver and reeds humming, you can feel the hush as the day settles into night. Piles of chair cushions, the small glass reserved for tea, a book with soft corners, and a plate waiting for the next meal. These mundane things become the holy vessels of a life. The nights on Mistawis were deep and safe, the best of them held long and slow conversations, a quiet fire, and the feeling that the world was all right in a way that did not need announcing. Valancy and Barney would listen to wind in the pines and let that sound do its gentle, patient work. Now breathe with me once more, in for 4 counts and out for 6. Feel your body sink deeper into the bed. Your head is cradled, and all the scenes of this story gather into a restful hush. An island with a small home, a warm stove, 2 people who tend one another, and a lake that keeps its own secrets. Valancy's days remind us that courage is sometimes as small as staying when we are tempted to leave, as gentle as the choice to care, and as brave as the act of asking for the life we want. Let the softness of this evening carry you toward sleep. Imagine an island evening, the lake breathing a silver breath, a small lighthouse of a lamp by a window, a cat curled like a comma at the hearth. There are no more obligations tonight, only the steady rhythm of breath and the thin, comfortable sound of pages turning in a book on a bedside table. You are safe. Let the past and the future fold gently away. Keep the memory of a quiet kindness in your chest and let your breathing slow. If you like, picture the blue castle now, not as a distant, unreachable place, but as a warm, private room waiting for you with soft cushions and gentle light. Sleep comes easily if you let it. Allow your lids to close and trust trust the soft tide of night. The world is quiet, the lake is calm, the hearth keeps its slow song. You are held, and when morning comes, you may wake rested, with a little more patience for the world and a sense that small, kind days are quietly miraculous.